I'd like to officially call our meeting to order. I would ask that we pause our video as Mr. Glass brings the flag forward. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Thank you once again for joining us this evening. The purpose of our meeting this evening is to provide the public with broader information in reference to updates and information regarding the budget. But before we do that, I'd like to ask Ms. Anderson to please conduct roll call.
Okay. Mr. Pittman?
Present.
Ms. Fowler?
Here.
Mr. Williams?
Present.
Ms. Carreras?
Present.
Mr. Thompson Leader?
Present.
Ms. Robinson?
Here.
Mr. Thompson?
Here.
Ms. Buckwalk?
Here.
Mr. Carter? Dr. Samuels?
Present.
Mr. Chris Selmer?
Present.
And Ms. Anderson is present.
Thank you very much. During our meeting next week, we will formally acknowledge and recognize a staff member who passed and also a student. We will also make a formal statement in reference to our perception in terms of the state of what's happening across the nation and how it relates to the Harrisburg School District. So without further ado, Ms. Anderson, are there public comments in reference to this evening's budget workshop?
None tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Selmer, I'd like to turn the meeting and the workshop over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Samuels. There's no official business in front of you this evening, so we're going to go right to presentations for an update on the 2021 budget. And Mr. Nornhold, can you bring the document up on your screen? Okay, thank you. So tonight's agenda, again, I will just give a very brief overview before I turn the presentation over to Mr. George Longridge, who's our CFO for the Harrisburg School District. We are presenting a balanced budget this evening in preparation of a final budget being provided to the receiver at next week's business meeting. No tax increase is being called for in this budget. That's consistent with last month. The update tonight, you will see the impact of the COVID-19 funds that have started to be allocated from the state, which certainly helped us to provide a balanced budget for this evening, as many of our revenues have declined as we anticipated. Our state revenue came in exactly where we projected when you look at last month's presentation. But again, the COVID-19 situation is still very real, and it's something that's very fluid and that we're continuing to monitor. So I will turn the presentation over to Mr. Longridge to start the budget summary. Mr. Longridge.
Thank you, Mr. Selmer. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to tonight just take a brief step back and revisit where we were before the COVID situation occurred. If we could, let's go back to February of this year. You'll see our...
Mr. Nornhold, can you move the slide, please, to page 3? Next page, please. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you. You'll see our revenues and expenses as we were projecting them in February of this year. We had projected a zero budget deficit at that point. Our structural deficit was fixed, and we were very optimistic at that point that we were on a glide path to a fairly easy budget season. However, as you all know, once March came, the COVID situation developed and everything changed, and it changed pretty dramatically. We spent the entire spring season having conversations and trying to project what this would mean for our school district. And when we had meetings and we developed our preliminary budget and presented it to the community in May, we realized that we weren't going to be in a position to present a balanced budget. We were going to have some challenges. And in May, we presented what was a pretty significant deficit. And Mr. Nornhold, if you could move to the next slide, please. You will see that we had a projected deficit of over $4.2 million. The important point in May was that it didn't include a tax increase, but we also had many unknowns at that point. We didn't have any idea of what the state was going to do with our COVID CARES money that was being given to us by the federal government. That was something that was really quite helpful, but at that point we didn't know whether the state was going to supplant those dollars and take those funds and use them for state funding. You might recall that conversation that we had. So we also had to make some adjustments to our revenue on other line items. And that's where really the biggest impact to our budget was. If you could move to the next slide, please. If you look at some of the revenue changes we were projecting in May, we saw that we were anticipating a pretty substantial decrease in subsidies, a decrease in our earned income tax, a decrease in real estate tax collection, transfer taxes, investment earnings, local tax collection. So we were expecting a pretty significant drop in our revenue due to the economic impact of COVID. I'm happy to report tonight, as you can see on the next slide, that due to some of the things that have transpired since our last meeting, we're once again presenting a balanced budget. And what has transpired since our last meeting is that the state has done a few things. Number one, we are able to take the CARES funding from the federal government, and there's no impact in terms of supplanting. The state has given us our same funding level in basic education funding, special education funding, and there's no supplanting issue. They are not taking that CARES funding from the federal government, and they're allowing us to keep that funding for allowing us to balance our budget with that funding stream. The other important point to make regarding the difference between May and June and what has transpired is, you might recall one of the important points at that time was there was a looming issue regarding the homestead farmstead tax relief effort. This is something that's been around for quite some time. It's related to Act 1. There was some uncertainty about whether there was enough revenue in the state coffers to fully fund tax relief here in Harrisburg. There's a pretty significant amount of tax relief that comes to Harrisburg taxpayers. I'm very pleased to report tonight that that is something that's intact in our budget, and taxpayers who have the homestead farmstead relief on their tax bills will continue to see that. And there's no impact due to the COVID situation. And the state legislators were able to keep that line item in the state budgets, so it's able to flow through to our budget as well. And all of that is occurring still without a tax increase. So it's very good news for our taxpayers and for our school district. Moving on to the next slide, you'll see I'm able to just break down and show you how that revenue change has occurred. It's very simply, we added the CARES federal funding, which is over $4.7 million. There's also a very small amount of additional safety funding. We estimated the PCCD funding, which we anticipated in our earlier projections. However, it actually came in slightly higher than what we anticipated. I added that little bit of extra revenue there. It's $82,000, almost $83,000. So our estimated proposed final budget for revenue is $158 million. And that is what we'll be presenting to the community and presenting as our final budget next week. When you go to the expense side of things, it's almost unchanged. If you go to the next slide, you'll see this is essentially the exact same breakdown as what we had in May, and this is virtually unchanged. What we're attempting to do now with this COVID funding, there's a lot of flexibility that we're allowed to have with this funding. We're allowed to use this to support our current programs, to fix any budget shortfalls, which, as I outlined, we've had many different local funding streams which were anticipating shortfalls due to COVID, and we're going to use this this funding to fill in those gaps. The other area we're concerned about is possible extra costs that we don't know about right now due to COVID safety issues, whether it's cleaning or extra safety precautions we need to take, whether it's regarding transportation or perhaps in bathrooms or extra cleaning to support student safety. We want to be aware of those issues as well. So you'll notice on this slide under object code 900, under other uses, there's an asterisk there. And that is an extra line item. We increased that about $550,000. That's an increase to our budgetary reserve. We don't know exactly where these costs might occur. So just in an abundance of caution, we're budgeting extra in our budgetary reserve, and that will give us extra flexibility throughout the year. The superintendent will have maximum discretion to request any budgetary transfers during the course of the year as any of these needs arise, and we can make those transfers monthly to address any costs that come up. That, of course, you see the bottom line, the total of our proposed final budget. It matches what our expense there matches what our revenue total is. Go to the next slide, you'll see a little bit of detail on our CARES funding. This is the federal program, has a little bit there on how it won't be reduced due to our legislature not supplanting those funds. And the one thing we want to emphasize, this is one-time funding. We're working very hard to not use this for any personnel costs, any benefit costs, any ongoing costs related to a position that could be tied to a collective bargaining agreement or any sort of personnel cost, because we don't want it to be something that would be then assumed by the local tax funding going on once this funding goes away. We're really trying to make sure that these are one-time costs that we can manage once we handle the COVID situation, it goes away. I already mentioned that we're using this to help balance our budget and to help manage the COVID-related expenses. One other point on COVID, there are some things related to this unique situation going on in the legislation that I think are important to know that impact our budget. The legislators are talking about extending discount periods, base periods on tax bills. Typically, this time of year, we know exactly what we want to do in terms of our budget in terms of what we want to do with our discount on our tax bill. There's a 2% that we offer, and that extends to the end of August. And then our base period goes through the end of October. And then the penalty phase goes through the end of December. Some of that is under review by the legislators, and there could be some changes. I listed the two pieces of legislation there. Frankly, the time is running short for them to make any sort of changes. We're going to hold off on printing our tax bills until we really have a good idea of what that looks like. I'm working closely with the city to perhaps match up our tax structure to be similar to what they're doing. They've eliminated their penalty phase so that they've extended their base period through the end of the calendar year this year. We may be recommending the same structure next week. I'm going to see what happens with legislation this week, if anything happens. If not, we'll be making a recommendation to whatever's best for the school district. There could be a potential impact to cash flow depending on whatever legislation comes out, but it's a fluid situation, and we want to make sure that we do what's best for the school district. And we'll do what's best, and we'll make a recommendation next week when we introduce the package of resolutions and our final form for the budget for consideration. And then the next item is really just a recap of what we're doing with our debt restructuring. We have a great opportunity. We have historically low interest rates. Our partner that we've selected to move ahead on this is RBC Capital. They're one of the leading firms of bond underwriting here in the Commonwealth. They've made a very strong pitch to work with us. We have several options that we can pursue given our debt portfolio. Our primary goal is to be as cost effective and keep as much flexibility as we can in the future while taking advantage of these low interest rates. What we're going to do next week is to put a resolution on the agenda to allow us to proceed to pursue this debt relief in the future. There will be multiple stages that will occur throughout the next several months, so we can take advantage of this and capitalize on these rates. Mr. Selmer, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add at this point, but this is a great opportunity for the district to save money given the rates at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Longridge. It is a really unbelievable, historic opportunity when you look at interest rates and what we've learned about the market in its current state. So it is the perfect time to engage in a restructuring. We've spent a lot of time on this over the last 6 months, working with different partners. PFM has been very helpful in helping us analyze. Dr. Samuels, we've talked with other financial partners. So there's been a lot of thought and a lot of time put into making this recommendation. So I just want to assure the community that this just isn't a quick off-the-cuff decision and recommendation we're making. This process started last fall when we arrived here as a new team. And now we're bringing it to fruition, and we just happen to have a situation where rates are a historic low to really move this forward. So again, I thank Ms. Edling and Mr. Longridge and the team for the work and working with our partners such as PFM, PD, et cetera, to really vet this process, the recommendation, in order to move it forward. So I think this will be a good long-term strategy for the Harrisburg School District. So thank you. A couple other comments as we transition. Thank you, Mr. Longridge, for the updates and letting the public know exactly where we stand as we move into next week's recommendation on a final budget for Dr. Samuel's approval. Just a couple quick comments as we transition. Mr. Longridge mentioned about the CARES money, and he mentioned about the flexibility, and really it comes down to ensuring continuity of education for the next fiscal year, and that's the flexibility that the CARES Act is allowing us to have. We can keep our complement of staff pretty much in place, minus some minor modifications. But we're able to at least go another year in the hopes that revenues bounce back. Again, if we're in this position next year without any one-time funding, it could be a much different conversation, not only for the Harrisburg School District, but many districts across the Commonwealth. So, but for 1 year, we feel like we have a solid plan in place. It allows us to keep our continuity of education plan in place as we head into the 2021 school year. This budget also does not utilize any fund balance. If you recall, the budget we inherited used close to $2 million in fund balance to balance the budget. The district was on a fund balance schedule that would have depleted the fund balance within the next 2 to 3 fiscal years. So we have stopped that trend, which is really critical for the long-term sustainability of the Harrisburg School District. Doesn't mean we don't have significant challenges we still need to work through, but we at least stop the reliance on fund balance to run the day-to-day operations of the school district. So that's certainly a positive that is noteworthy as we head into the new fiscal year. And I'm sorry, Mr. Longridge, you have one more slide. End of the fund transfers. My apologies.
Yeah, no,
Back to
that's
Mr.
okay.
Longridge.
This is all great information, and it's all part of our plan to really move things ahead financially. You'll see here that next week we'll be recommending several fund transfers, and this is really important because we are excited about this because what this means, as Mr. Selmer said, because we're so cautiously optimistic that things are moving in the positive direction, we don't expect to be using any fund balance next year because we have a balanced budget. Because we don't feel we're quite out of the woods on COVID, we're really unsure about how things will shake out this year. We're cautiously optimistic. However, we still need to move ahead and make some transfers for our end of the year preparations. So therefore, we'll be making a $500,000 transfer from the general fund to capital reserve, and that's to support some projects that are needed at Foose Elementary School. Another transfer that we'll be doing, and this is more of an internal transfer, but it's important to be transparent and to make sure that everyone's aware of this. And this is to follow up on some work that the board did, or the receiver did, excuse me, back in November, is to continue the work to establish the Internal Service Fund to support our healthcare initiatives back in November of 2019. So those two transfers will be on the agenda. We think that this is really very important, and when you look at some of the moves and some of the things that are happening with the district, it's very positive, and you know, we're excited moving forward because this is something that I think will launch into bigger and better things, provided that the economy starts to turn around and bounce back from this this COVID situation. So that's the end of my report, Mr. Selmer. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Longridge, for that detailed update on the budget. Wanted to provide, at the receiver's request this evening, an update on the MCIU partnership. And this update, and again, I'm not going to read every bullet point on every slide, but it's to give the public an overview as we're ending year 1 of the 3-year partnership with the MCIU team coming in to provide support to the Harrisburg School District as part of the receiver team. We wanted to provide this update this evening of the different areas that we've been working on. Again, this certainly isn't all inclusive of each area and the work that's been done and is continuing to be done, but it'll just give you some high level bullet points of work that's being done by each area. It also gives you at the bottom the original MCIU agreement and then the revised MCIU agreement, and that's the FTE equivalencies. So you can see between the original agreement and heading into the new 2021 school year, any differences between those full-time equivalencies for this contract. So the first slide here is the Office of Superintendent, and you'll see there a number of initiatives have been worked on. As you know, there's been a transition. I was the acting assistant superintendent. Dr. George was the acting superintendent. Dr. George announced his retirement. I then moved into the acting superintendent role effective January 1st. So you'll see that transition for the new school year has been reflected on the FTE allotment under the agreement for the 2021 school year. If we could move to the next slide, there's an update on the Office of Academics and some of the bigger initiatives that this team has been working so diligently on, as we not only work on the financial stability of the school district, but we work on the academic stability and performance of the school district. And again, just some high-level updates from the Office of Academic team. You'll see this was one revision that was made last year where we had one academic officer, and then you'll see the revised, which essentially was revised back in August, was one academic officer and two assistant directors, which are Mr. Ed Gooch and Miss Jackie Castleman. So again, you can see the update from those revisions. The next slide is our Office of Accountability, which is led by Dr. Latrice Mumine. Again, this was an office we established based on some of the initial things we were seeing when we arrived into the district, specifically around the management and oversight of federal programs being a major concern that we needed to address immediately. And part of the Office of Accountability is the federal programs, but it's also working with our central registration, our child accounting, federal programs. Dr. Mumine also provided us assistance during COVID regarding our food service oversight and distribution program. So Mr. Glass could then focus on the IT and the distribution of device initiative that needed to be done throughout the school district. So again, just some highlights of the work. Certainly, again, none of this is all inclusive, I assure you, but it's just some one-page highlights of some of the work being done. The Office of Finance and Operations, which I combined those on the one slide, you'll see, and there's been a lot of updates around finance in the first year. So many of these initiatives you are probably already aware of. And again, a lot of work's been done in this area regarding internal controls. This team has had to spend a lot of time working on the real-time audit, which is being conducted by the Auditor General. Revision of just rebuilding a budget, working with HR and position control, etc. This was really building the baseline to have stability and trust in our financial outlook here in the school district. And you'll see under this agreement, Sandy Edling for the first year was doing a dual role. As we move forward, Mr. Longridge was hired and started his role in March. Because we need a full-time CFO for the Harrisburg School District. And just as a reminder, there were a number of different changes made prior to the MCIU arriving, and certainly those costs and those positions help support this contract and the work that's being done to move the Harrisburg School District forward. Under the Office of Human Resources, we were able to settle the HEA contract, which was a huge accomplishment for this district, the teachers, and the community at large. This was significant, and we were also able to settle some legacy issues that could have been extremely costly for the Harrisburg School District as part of that agreement. So again, just a lot of work done around position control, ensuring that staff were properly, had their proper Act 34-151 clearances before they started this past school year. We know that was a major issue within the district, and that was well reported by Ms. Lillis and the team back when we started the 1920 school year. Created a workplace safety committee. We re-engaged that. That brought a credit of $30,000 onto to the district by having that functioning in accordance with labor and industry laws. So again, and we did the RFP for healthcare, which was extremely important. So the cost update is the next slide. And we laid out this slide so you could see the July 1 FTE count the actual FTE count with adjustments that were made and approved after August, and then the 2021 FTE count. And you'll see our initial contract was slated at $1.4 million for the work that was being done. What we've done this year, and we had to do, is annualize that full cost for the 2021 school year. So the 1920 school year, even though we made adjustments, we did not come back to the district in the first year and say we need to increase those costs, because we credited the district for the transitional costs of all of us coming in at different points in this first year. So that's why we did not come back to Dr. Samuels and ask for an increase during this last fiscal year. What this is doing this year is it's the cost annualized for the team that's in place. So if we would have been here July 1st of 19, the cost would have been much closer to the cost that you see here today. I also want to make note that this cost was built into the May budget presentation and is in the June final budget. Lastly, this cost also is because basically the MCIU team is covering positions that ultimately, if and when Harrisburg transitions back to local control, these positions will need to exist under the Harrisburg structure for operations to continue in the manner that they are today. So certainly there's costs that Harrisburg will be paying if these, number of us were employed under the Harrisburg School District that are under contracted services because of MCIU being here. So again, one thing we promised is, we would give an update after the first year. We would lay out the cost structure, and we would make sure the public knew moving forward annually what the cost would be for the team to be in place and to work with the receiver as part of the receiver team here in Harrisburg School District. So we want to be transparent. We want everything, laid out so the public can see it and have a clear understanding of what the costs are and how we're moving forward as a school district. So that leads me to next steps in the budgetary process. So next week, we will have a resolution for the receiver to approve a final budget for the 2021 school year, which again does not include a tax increase, which is good news. July 1st of 2020, as Mr. Longridge articulated earlier, tax bills will be mailed out, and we're still trying to figure out the schedule that will be on those tax bills, and he will continue to work with the city of Harrisburg to see if we could have a coordination between the two entities on that billing schedule. For the summer, rest of the summer, professional staffing changes will be finalized due to realignment, budget concerns, and grant reduction and loss. So we mentioned last month we had 2 grants that one was cut in half. The other was pretty much down to minimal, which was it went from a $500,000 grant to $67,000. So we needed to make the appropriate adjustments with that grant funding not being in place. In addition, we made note that we were doing equitable realignment and redistribution throughout the school district. And so that process has been ongoing since the end of May. So that will continue over the next couple of weeks. Ms. Lillis is working very closely with the leadership of HEA as we work through those changes and modifications. We'll continue to monitor what is a very fluid situation with COVID-19, not only from a financial perspective, but from an academic and operational perspective. Next week, we'll talk more about what the summer will look like, what the work that will need to be done, and then some of the key approvals that will be needed over the summer as we prepare to start the 2021 school year, whatever that may or may not look like. I do want to make note tonight, we will be surveying families over the next week. So we will push out information because we want to hear from our families about their thoughts, their concerns as we head into our planning for the 2021 school year. And we'll continue with the debt restructuring process. As Mr. Longridge mentioned, we are going to bring forward a recommendation, parameters resolution for Dr. Samuels' consideration at next week's business meeting. Dr. Samuels, that concludes our presentation for this evening. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
And thank you very much for sharing. Thank you, Mr. Longridge. Thank you, Mr. Selmer. I would like to make a few comments in reference to the budget workshop and the information that was shared. Of course, COVID did impact everything, but I do think it's significant. Given the financial status of the school district, for the team to come in and really amend the budget. And to really look at real numbers to see what was in place and to make the appropriate adjustments. Very significant. The fact that the district's bond rating was on the line, and the work that was done to ensure the district maintain a bond rating, very significant. Not just the financial components. When you think about staffing, and each of the items that I'm referencing, I'm also doing a correlation in terms of what's in this recovery plan, financial recovery plan, which is the law. And so for a school district to operate effectively, it has to have a consistent budget, real dollars, real information, cannot be guesswork. And to maintain that, that also has a tremendous impact on students, staff members, and the broader community. That cannot be underscored. When you think about restructuring and really breathing and recreating an Office of Human Resources, significant. To follow the law, the appropriate guidelines, rules, regulations that are mandated by the Pennsylvania Department of Education and that are federal law, those things that were done, significant. When we think about the academic emphasis on our students, still much work is being done in that area, but to look at the inconsistencies that were in place and to begin to transform, to develop appropriate curriculum, significant, noteworthy. When you think about the work that's still being done in terms of operations, food services, transportation, facilities, all of those things are critical when operating a school district effectively and moving towards building a highly competent, highly effective school district. Makes all the difference in the world. The purpose of this evening's workshop, again, is to be very transparent with the community, with staff members, parents, and stakeholders. Very important. And when we think about the MCIU team, we think about the difficulty the district has had historically in terms of attracting talent. Time was of the essence to do what's right to move this district forward. And to be very candid with you, what was reflected in terms of the full-time equivalents, the positions, etc., very thoughtfully done, but to really move a mountain. And that, just is a snapshot of the work that has been done and the work that is being done to move this district in the right direction. And when we think about the financial impact, this budget, no tax increase for sure. But one of the pieces I would be remiss if I did not mention is the fact that without addressing issues, the team working tirelessly to make strides to correct things that were done inappropriately, mismanagement, it would have cost the district lots more money. And so that's what's so very important. And so the whole notion of being transparent, sharing is very important. Next week is an opportunity for, again, the public to comment on the budget. We'll follow the appropriate protocol consistent with Policy 903. That will be reflected on the website. But it will be a very, very full business meeting next week, a very, very full business meeting so that we address all of the details. And so then again, as the public, I invite you and encourage you to continue to look at board docs so that you can see the comprehensive agenda. You'll see personnel issues, you'll see academic issues and items that need to be addressed. You'll see human resources items that are to be addressed. And that's just a microcosm of what will be reflected. But to do the business of this school district and do what's right, That's what this is about. So I would like to publicly, once again, to thank you for the hard work that went into the budget. I'd like to thank the team. I'd like to thank the board for their commitment, their support, and I'd like to thank the public as a whole. And without further ado, please join us next week. That's Monday, June 22nd at 6 o'clock for the next budget meeting. And please continue to monitor the website for the broader agenda. Thank you, Mr. Summer. If there are no further comments, I will adjourn this meeting.
Dr. Samuels, I just want to mention to the public next week, we'll be providing an academic update, enrichment update heading into the summer. So I think that will be a very important update by Dr. Sneath and the team, and specifically around, the one-to-one technology initiative that's really coming into play now since we've gotten the grant, thankfully, from PDE and the work that's being done by Dr. Sneath and the IT department. We're poised to be a one-to-one district as we start the next school year. And I wanted to mention that earlier because that's just, it's amazing given since March 13th, we've come that far. So I want to thank the team for all their hard work in that area as well.
And if we would continue to, monitor what's on the website and other ways that information will be shared, because the goal is to have the district serve as a repository of information to support students, children, families, etc. And we will be adding additional information immediately following this meeting to provide other broad pieces of information for the public.
I do have a question, please. Dauphin County is scheduled to go green on Friday. Will the meeting next week be an in-person meeting or a Zoom meeting?
Next week's meeting will still be a Zoom meeting. It will be done virtually because there's additional work. Even though the county may be moving, there's still much work to be done before we begin to have the public meeting. Thank you. That was a great question. Without further ado, the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much for being here. Have a great evening. Thank you all.